welcome to another episode of Iconic Freedom, the Formula. We are setting the standard for accountability and responsibility, the ownership of your choices and the consequences for those choices. Let each care for self, and all will be cared for.
Telling the New York Times, quote, had the president gotten out sooner, there may have been other candidates in the race. The anticipation was that if the president were to step aside, that there would be an open primary. Our next guest has recently been vocal about missteps made in the Harris campaign. It's DNC Woman's Chair and Harris surrogate Lindy Lee joining us now. Lindy,
right. Well, thank you so much for having me. And what's left unsaid is that she is not forcefully saying that Harris would have been the strongest candidate after a rigorous process. She's not saying definitively that it would have been her. She says it might have been her, but, you know, maybe there was an alternative. Maybe it was Josh Shapiro or maybe Gretchen Whitmer, someone who could forcefully litigate the case against Donald Trump. And if you truly believe that Trump is an existential threat, and that's what Democrats have been saying for the past couple of years, then you should have had that process instead of just coronating somebody. I have friends, in both worlds. And let me tell you, the relationship was terrible even before the campaign. There was backstabbing. They wanted to hand her the most, least favorable agenda, the legislative priorities. She was stuck with immigration, civil rights, like none of that went
before
anywhere.
She was even a candidate,
exactly.
You're saying, as vice president.
There was a lot of backstabbing we saw in the press. People were leaking stuff all the time. The White House was leaking like a sieve when it came to Kamala Harris. And finally, in the final year, she was able to stabilize and stop the bleeding of her staff because there was a lot of turnover as well. And we saw the press reports about that. And things have finally started to calm down. And I actually think President Biden, the whole endorsing her 30 minutes after he dropped out, I think that was a big FU to the party. You don't want me, here's somebody that you may not like. The truth is, this is just an epic disaster. This is a $1 billion disaster. Actually, it was $1.018 billion, I think, right? There were $20 million or $18 million in debt.
Right.
It's incredible. And I raised millions of that. I have friends that I have to be accountable to and to explain what happened because I told them it was a margin of error race. I was promised, Jen O'Malley Dillon promised all of us that Harris would win. She even put videos out saying that Harris would win. I believed her. My donors believed her. And so they wrote massive checks. I feel like a lot of us were misled. And even on the night of election night, I looked somebody in the eye and I said, are we going to do this? Are we going to pull it off? She told me yes. And I asked somebody else, like, how are you feeling? He's like, we're going to win Iowa. And I was like, what? I was wondering about that. I was like, I asked them, are you privy to internal numbers that I am not seeing? Because I study this so carefully, and I just wasn't seeing any basis for that level of confidence. And I also want to remind our viewers that, the Trump campaign was touting all of these incredible empirical data weeks before election night. What Harris is touting was the door knocking. She didn't say anything really about early voting. Now I know it's because there was nothing much. That's a really good question. I want to point out that they waited 3 days. Michelle and Barack Obama waited 3 days to endorse Kamala Harris. It was a silence heard around the world. And prior to Biden's endorsement that no one really anticipated, they were vetting people like Mark Kelly. Kamala Harris wasn't at the top of the ticket. So Biden's endorsement of Harris caught a lot of people off guard, even the chieftains of the party. I really think it was a big FU to everyone. I'm so sorry.
It's all right. I think I'm getting a vivid picture.
I didn't finish the word.
Specifically when it comes to why.
So much to unpack from that particular set of clips. I didn't want to not have the majority of it in its context in order to talk about it, because I think what this young lady is talking about on many different levels is not only indicative of the opposition party, but it is indicative of people that are in media, that are in politics, that are in celebrity, all that kind of stuff, in terms of their accountability and their responsibility. A couple things came up for me when I was listening to it initially, and since then I've listened to it a couple more times. And one of those things is that at what point did you know? When was the inflection point for you, that flash point of, something is off here? But she didn't want to follow it. And if you go back and you listen to her segments, she even says, well, I went and asked this person and they assured me. And then I asked this person and then they assured me. But my thing is, well, why didn't you trust your own internal authority? Because even prior to that, towards the end of that segment, she said that, the former President Obama, not endorsing Kamala right away was the silence heard round the world. It's like, well, if you heard all of that, where was the part in life that life was whispering in your ear, tapping you on the shoulder, and you waited all until you got to election night before you let reality slap you across the face how many times to realize that you now have $1 billion, failure is basically $1,020,000,000, as it turns out. Somebody, Kevin Sorbo, made a response on X today that said, the person that just lost the election lost $1 billion plus being 20 million in debt, wanted to fix the economy. And I thought, that's very clever. Kevin is very funny if you ever get a chance. And speaking of X, I am on X. You can follow me there at FreedomAZ0704. I am the Batman on there, so feel free to follow me there. And we can, check out each other's threads. And I use a lot of stuff from X when I'm doing these podcasts because that's great content, and it makes it super easy to be able to provide you some examples of the standards that, you want to set for yourself, the standard that I set for myself, the qualities of speaking to accountability and responsibility and do no harm. And that was a lot of what was going on in this whole segment here, is it's really revealing to you that the same people that lied about Biden and lied about his health and everything else, these are the same people, as this woman found out, are the same people that lied to her about Kamala and her success and where all of this was, and the fact that Biden had come out very shortly after he had stepped down and endorsed her right away because he was trying to give an FU to, the party that tried to push him out. Not tried, but they did. They pushed him out. My point in using this particular segment is the importance of looking at it to say, when is the moment that you go, And when you go, that is an indicator to you in that moment. Be efficient about your life. Check it out. Look into it more. Don't just believe things. I mentioned this before, and I still do this on X all the time, and I do it on Facebook as well, and Instagram, TikTok as well. Don't just believe what is being shown to you or what is being said to you, not even from me. Do your own research. Earn the reward of satisfaction from knowing what that reality is. We're going to look at a couple of other things, but one piece that came up for me during the week, and I was talking to my friend Dan about this, is that, there seems to be this thing where, as we're watching these meltdowns of, all of these various TV stations and pundits and whatever, that they don't seem to self-evaluate and self-correct, right? I mean, they're not really understanding what does that mean to self-evaluate and self-correct. And I think, so one of the things is emotions prevent them from speaking to reality, right? Thoughts have to be developed. So if your thoughts have to be developed, you need comprehension, you need cognition. You need to not be in your emotions. Emotions are what? They are indicators, flashpoints to let you know to pay attention to something, and that's it, not to live there. Not to set up shop and set up a camp and, be there the rest of your life. And what's interesting is that if a person is able to take an experience and then have some more thoughts about it, and then take another experience and have more thoughts about it, they can start to develop for themselves, what their opinions are, or what the qualities of something that they like, or a pursuit of something that they would like to do. If they are not doing this, then they are not moving forward. They are stagnant in whatever is going on in their world. And the question that I ask people, like some of these crazy people on The View, is like, listen, you keep, and some of the people on some of the other stations have done this too, it's like you keep trouncing on other Americans who didn't agree with you. But did you ever stop to think that it might be you? Maybe you're the one that doesn't see it. Where is your blind spot? So it occurred to me, I thought, well, I would love to know for myself, and, as often I do, you wake up in the early morning and some thought comes to me about, to ask a person a question. And this could be you for yourself, and it could be you for the people that surround you that are endeavoring their own personal self-development, in wanting to know more about who they are, especially if you're starting up a friendship or you're starting up a relationship or you're into a new job. It's easy to just ask so that it isn't, doesn't put anybody in a defensive situation. But, to ask a question, you have these thoughts. Are there any thoughts that you had previously that you changed? You had these thoughts, and are there any thoughts that you had previously that you changed? And in that thought process, what concrete and specific can you describe how that change came about? This gives it gives an opening to a conversation to have about who the individual is and what their thought process is, and then let them speak. It's why these podcasts with interviews like Joe Rogan and so many of the other ones are Sean Ryan, they're so important, because sometimes a person might have thoughts, but they haven't spoken them aloud. And when they've been given the opportunity to speak them aloud, they start to develop them. They may start to change or pivot, or they might have an amazing epiphany during that time. And it can be valuable to some people and for, presidents and leaders to be able to have conversation where we allow the conversation to develop. So the question again is, you have these thoughts. Are there any thoughts that you had previously that you have changed? And if they say, well, yes, I have, it's great. What can you tell me concrete and specifically? Can you describe how that change came about? And then give that person that platform and that opportunity to open up conversation and just be able to receive what the person says in the discussion in fullness of whatever their thinking is. Don't have you're not trying to do anything other than get to know who they are, get to know their thought process, hear what they have to say. It's not about getting them to change or getting them to see something or to figure it out. No, it's just about having a conversation, which I think can be lovely, and it can really open up dialogue for a lot of people. Okay, so then these next clips were from a recent... I was actually thinking about these topics and wanting to talk about them on the podcast, and then lo and behold, the universe always provides in my mind. I wound up seeing this episode of Gutfeld, and there's a couple of things on here that I thought were terrific.
And maybe I'm being too optimistic, Michael, but I feel like the left-right bifurcation thing might be coming to an end, because what was behind that the whole time was a media machine that was trying to do that. And now you see kind of like this populist movement blending things.
Well, yeah, I think a lot of us thought that the media at least reflected reality to some extent. It might be biased, but there was still some basic reflective role. I would say the moment that the media just really died for just ordinary Americans is the moment where, literally within 24 hours, the media said Biden is totally fine. Yeah. And the next day was he has to go.
Yeah.
That was just, the distance of time was just too short. Everybody had to see what was going on for that. But this is, look, I'm still such a softie. I mean, I want redemption, I want reconciliation, but you can't get that until you get the truth out, until you get some accountability. I don't think we can trust the people that weaponize the government against people like Tulsi Gabbard. I don't think we can trust the people that turn Department of Homeland Security into a censorship operation to censor one side of the political debate, to censor true stories about vaccine side effects. We need the Twitter files for the CIA, for the FBI, for DHS, for every single government agency that's been covering this stuff up for 50 years. It's been 50 years since we had the Church Committee hearings to get to the bottom of CIA abuses of power. We need a Church Committee hearing, 2.0 for all the stuff that's been going on over the last 10 years.
Yeah.
That's why they're so terrified of Trump.
Yeah.
Michael talks about a couple of things there that I think are important. We discussed in last week's podcast, and we talk about this theme quite often, is that there is no accountability unless there is action taken. And that is true for your own life, right? Is that you can say, I'm responsible to my choices, and I am accountable, and that accountability comes in the new action that I take based on my choices, always under the guise of do no harm, right? So one of the things, though, that he did bring up the thing about accountability, and so true. I mean, it's so important. And he reiterated what we talked about in the last segment, which is that the same people, again, that told you Biden was fine are the people then that lied to you about the election with Kamala. And what was interesting was he said that it came to that point where it was no longer something to the effect you're no longer able to ignore it because it was right in front of your face. So I'm going to circle back. Life whispers in your ear. It will tap you on the shoulder. It will slap you across the face until you get it. And how many years did it slap Americans across the face to pay attention? And there were quite a few people that were paying attention, but the media was playing the game where they were basically taking cover for the administration. Now, all of this is important in terms of who do you trust and who don't you trust? And I've said before, there is no trust. There is only observation of choices made and your observation of where those choices lead. They move towards something or they move away from it. And you have to decide the quality of the people that are making the choices and the quality of the outcomes from those choices. And that accountability piece, if people are going to be accountable for lying, then what is the consequence? What is it that's going to happen to them as a result of this? The other piece is, very quickly, he just kind of skimmed over it. It was kind of small, but he says, I'm kind of a softie, I still want redemption. It's just like, okay, so thank you for revealing this is your self-interest and your motivation. So while he speaks of accountability, I would also be very suspect of what that accountability would look like if it were to come from him. Because somebody that says they're a softie is a person that will excuse other people's behavior.
This Thanksgiving, libs won't be forgiving. On a Friday, a Yale psychiatry fellow joined MSNBC's Joy Reid, she needed it, to discuss how to interact with MAGA members of your family this holiday season. Her advice: don't do it. Roll it, Esther.
If you are going into a situation where you have family members, where you have close friends who have voted in ways that are against you, like what you said, against your livelihood, and it's completely fine to not be around those people and to tell them why, to say, I have a problem with the way that you voted because it went against my very livelihood, and I'm not going to be around you this holiday. I need to take some space for me.
Good for you. Though, I bet her family's relieved. They were afraid to serve white meat because she'd think it's racist. Mike, you brought this up earlier about losing friends and whatnot. I find that the people that I see that I used to know that are on Twitter and stuff, it's an ego issue. It's the inability to admit that they might be wrong. I'll even say somebody that you probably know, Sam Harris is like this. You've noticed that it's a very brittle thing for him to admit that he's wrong, so it's just the rest of the world.
Yeah, I mean, he's in the grip of a religion. He doesn't think so. He thinks he's an atheist. But that's the most dangerous religious zealot, is somebody that doesn't even know they're in the grip of a woke religion.
And then finally, this piece here, we're hearing a lot of this about people that, they don't want to go to family holidays with other people. And I see this all over the place. If you lose friends, over your political views, well, then there's something wrong with you. Yeah, no. So I will listen to people and I will hear how they came to their ideas, how they develop their thoughts, and sometimes they do that aloud in front of others. And always having those conversations and those thoughts to satisfaction so that we can hear what ideas a person has. Put your ideas on the table. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it fully. The idea that people want to virtue signal, is how I see it, is they want to say, I put my politics aside so that I don't lose friendships. And I say to you that I do not put politics aside from an individual, because the filter that they pass everything through in their life impacts their self-interest and their motivation. Whatever that filter is, they are passing through that prism of whatever their politics are. And their self-interest motivations will impact their actions, their words, and their deeds. And they will thrust this on, they will exact this onto a society. Do no harm does not even come into play with those who oppose my political views, because they would harm others for their own gain, which we've witnessed for decades. Responsibility of choices made where accountability of consequences administered are what my life is foundationed on. So if that is not happening because they have a particular political party they belong to that does not invoke and obligate from self responsibility of choice, accountability of consequences, and do no harm, then I'm not putting my politics aside. All I'm doing then is scamming myself, because the eventuality will come that their behavior will escalate to a certain level where that will be no longer compatible for me. And my thought is, I want to be efficient with my time. There is no point in me trying to endeavor a friendship or a relationship with an individual who is not able, is not capable, or completely unwilling to go back to the beginning of the podcast when we talked about having thoughts, being able to self-evaluate and self-correct, and especially in the premise and the path of do no harm. And that's going to do it for another week. Thank you so much for joining me. Hit that like button if you would. Share it with your family and friends. You never know if it might help them on their endeavor. All the fun links are down below if you want to subscribe to anything. I would always be grateful. And if you have any comments, drop those down below. I will see you next week. Let each care for self, and all will be cared for.